Morning Glory, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Coming up after the break, the Attorney General of Missouri and candidate for the United States Senate, Josh Hawley, joins me. But first, to discuss the Singapore summit, the Department of Justice Inspector General's report and separation of families at the border. I've got three of the very best correspondents in town. We've got Courtney Kube, of course, of NBC News, where she covers the Pentagon and national security. Tim Alberta of Politico and Seung Kim of the Washington Post. Welcome to you three. I'm going to go backwards. Friday stories, Thursday stories at the beginning of the week. Tim Alberta, the president on the lawn of the White House on Friday morning said it's not his fault, it's the Democrats' fault that families are being separated at the border. They've got to change it. The Republicans are bringing bills to the floor of the House. A, is what he said true, and B, are those bills going to pass?
So A, what he said is not true. This is an administration policy, and there's just no black or white there. Or, excuse me, there's no gray area there. Pardon me, it is black and white. This is a Trump administration policy that the administration is choosing to enforce as a deterrent to keep people from crossing the border illegally. Secondly, I think it's important for folks to understand that these bills that are going to come to the floor of the House next week are part of a messaging exercise, part of a political exercise, because you have an awful lot of Republican incumbents who are in danger this November, and they're very antsy. They've got a lot of their constituents who are upset about the fact that Republicans have done very little, if anything, up until this point to try and address the plight of, at the very least, the small section of the undocumented community that qualifies as the so-called dreamers under DACA, much less for the broader 11 or 12 million people here illegally. So these bills are an attempt to, if nothing else, equip some of these endangered Republicans with talking points that they can go home and say, look, I pushed my party's leadership, I got to vote on this, but none of these bills are going to become law.
So as a moral and religious basis, I want to make clear, you're right, this is an immoral and irreligious policy. Number two, as a legal matter, you're right, this does not have to happen. But as a political matter, I want to drive this home, because I haven't talked about it as a political matter on the radio. I've talked about it as a moral matter. It's also political suicide. Do the Republicans not understand that separating families at the border will get them killed?
I don't think they do. I think that there is a calculation inside the White House that the headlines coming out of this, while damaging to certain elements of the Trump coalition, are probably actually energizing to other elements of the Trump coalition. I think there's no question about that.
Seung, I want to ask you about the second story of the week, which has to do with the IG report and the undeniable smoking gun. We will stop him. Peter Strzok. That is the wall around which many people are trying to build the cesspool-like wall, but the cess is getting out of the pool. How bad was that IG report for the FBI and for critics of President Trump?
I mean, the "we'll stop it" text message was a pretty striking revelation from that IG report, and we're already seeing the president's allies and the president himself in the White House to that as an incredibly important revelation here. Sarah Sanders said at the White House briefing shortly after the report was announced that while she wasn't going to weigh in directly on whether the FBI agent who wrote that text, Peter Strzok, should be fired, it's pretty it can be assumed that the president thinks he should be gone. And we have the IG report gives a lot more ammunition to the president's allies to kind of discredit looking at that text, to just kind of discredit the whole investigation together. But I do want to point out the president insisted on Friday morning that the IG report does exonerate him. That is not accurate, that the report itself did not weigh in on that. But you'll see this report going forward used by both sides as ammunition for everyone's arguments here.
It does not exonerate him. It doesn't undermine the special counsel. He should leave Mueller alone and Rosenstein alone. But should there be a second special counsel? Is that on the table now to investigate the FBI's role in the 2016 election against Trump, and obviously so given what's in the IG report?
Well, that's a question we're going to have to be asking people like Speaker Ryan in the coming days to see if the conclusions of this report changes the calculus on that. Obviously, a special counsel is what we've been hearing from some time or a second special counsel is what we've been hearing from some time from some House Republicans, and we'll see next week how much the IG report changes that.
Now, Courtney, I left you for last because it's the hardest. The Singapore summit, then Mike Pompeo goes to Seoul, then he goes to China. At the end of the week, Saturday morning, where do you think we are that we weren't last week?
Well, I mean, so we have in writing, we have the agreement that they made in writing, which is very broad, no specifics, and doesn't really move the ball any further than it already was, where North Korea had already said that they would denuclearize. But then President Trump came out, of course, in that press conference afterward and talked about exercises. There's still no guidance on exactly what that means. There's a lot of assumption, but as of this point, the military has not gotten any guidance to suspend the next one, which is Ulchi Freedom Guardian. It starts in about 8 weeks or so. So we have a lot of broad ideas, but no specifics. You know, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, he was asked on his travels after the summit about some of the language that was used. It didn't use a very specific State Department kind of diplomatic phrase, the complete, irreversible, verifiable denuclearization. Instead, it talked about complete denuclearization. So, and then when he was asked about it by a reporter, he kind of got his back up and said, well, that's a ridiculous question. Well, what we don't know is exactly what has North Korea agreed to do, on what timetable, and what are the steps. Is it a reciprocal thing? When North Korea does something, will the U.S. respond? And we're seeing the very practical impact of that now, where Mike Pompeo has said, well, there won't be any economic relief or sanctions relief until the full denuclearization. North Korea State TV is saying something very different, that there will be a step-by-step process of each side making some concession.
Now, I discount North Korean state propaganda, but I'm very interested in what you are picking up from your colleagues who make this their business as to buzz about side deals, understanding, and specifics, because when the Secretary of State said it will take 2 to 2.5 years, it was consistent with what the President said at his press conference after the signing, which is, it'll go very long, but after a period of time, it'll be irreversible. No one knew what that meant. What do you hear that it's been agreed to that may not be on that piece of paper that was so thin?
So there are very specific details that they will not share, that the administration won't share. The next 2.5 years, they have said, the U.S. has said there will be real progress, but nothing specific. The only specifics that we have right now is that North Korea has allegedly agreed to dismantle some rocket or engine testing facility. As of now, you know, I'm asking the question over and over, as I'm sure a lot of journalists are, there hasn't been any movement on that. There's no actual indications that they're, and what exactly even does that mean? What does dismantling mean? Does it mean to shutter it? Does it mean to pour concrete in reactors? We just don't have the kinds of specifics that a summit like this was a historical summit that for years will be discussed, right? But we don't have any real specifics out of it. There's never been a time where, a communique or something.
Let's talk November for a second. Right after he got back, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, went to your hometown of Michigan. He didn't go for the baseball, obviously, to Alberta. So he went to do some politics in a swing state. How does this week play for the President and the Republicans in November?
I think the question is going to be whether or not Republican voters are concerned with the lack of specifics that Courtney was just discussing, right? I think the optics of it for a lot of Republican voters were good. They say, hey, look, you know, the American presidency for the past generation has failed to address this problem in a meaningful way and to get any kind of results. And here is our dear leader meeting with their dear leader, and we trust him, right? He can do no wrong. But the question about what exactly was accomplished there, and then not to even mention some of the sideline optics as far as saluting the North Korean military official and some of the other sort of strange happenings there, do those plant seeds of doubt in Republican minds? I don't know that it does much to energize the Democratic base necessarily, but I do wonder if it has any energizing effect on the Republican base.
Seung, how about the IG report and the November elections? Do you think this will play all the way through the vote?
I think it's just hard. I think what it probably does is just harden people's views on where they stand on the broader investigations, the broader Mueller probe, and we've seen this kind of consistent campaign from the president and his representatives to really undercut Mueller's credibility here. And I think the fact that this does raise questions about some of the conduct at the FBI. I mean, we've seen polling over the last several months shows, you know, a lot of some, or not a lot, but some confidence from Republican voters in the FBI, which is a startling development considering this is a law enforcement institution. So it could play out that way, but I still do believe that the midterm elections will ride a lot on the president's approval ratings, and we'll see how that goes from where those numbers go from here, especially after that historic summit, and also hinge on a lot of just kind of the other fundamental issues like the economy and healthcare.
Quick exit, Courtney. Any more summits between now and November?
President Trump said that he's going to call North Korea this weekend. Someone asked on Fox News on Friday, someone said, what are you doing on Father's Day? And he said, I'm calling North Korea. And
make no plans.
So I have no idea.
Make no plans.
Your guess is